There we go. 11 a.m. What it says. Let me turn this off. Don't want her talking to me anymore. Still connecting to the cloud. There we go. Come on, you. Oh, I think that's it. Let's see. All these people in. Oh, not that. Come on, man. Oh. Where was I? There it is. So, good morning, everybody. Today is not Monday, but Tuesday. Tuesday, March 30th. Yeah, it's March 30th, right? 2021. It's a minute after 11. It's almost 2 minutes after. And well, last week we were spring breaking. Hope you guys had a good spring break. And then I guess it was, Thursday before that, we finished up our special senses, I think. And then today we start the cardiovascular system. And after this, you're looking at your third exam, which will be coming up. It'll be when we finish this. I'm thinking the drop date is April 12th, which is like the week after next. We're off this Friday for Good Friday, and then when you come back, we got a week. So I think the 12th. So before we're going to have your test before the 12th. So like, let me look at the calendar real quick. Let's see. April 12th. Today's the 30th. This week, then next week. So you guys would be on the 8th. So I'm thinking a week from Thursday, probably, more than likely. We can do that. Finish up this and have your third exam. Because you know, there's a lot of you that are kind of waiting on that results of the third exam to see what you want to do with the course, whether you should stay in or not. So anyway, well, let's get started and talk about the exam a little bit more later, I guess. But let me get this going. I'm gonna change my display here. There we go. Everything looks good. Except this. I gotta hide something. This. There. I got too much stuff on my screen. Cardiovascular system. Of course, that's all the heart and blood vessels. So we're talking about the anatomy of the heart. And then not every single blood vessel that there is in the body, but the main ones that I think that you need to know for this course. So beginning with the anatomy of the heart, I have the gross anatomy of the heart. And we've talked about some of these structures already in passing, I guess you can say. when we're talking about membranes and body cavities and things like that. When we're talking visceral versus parietal and all that. Well, a little bit more detail about the pericardium. So the pericardium, I tell you, the heart is enclosed in a double-walled sac called the pericardium. The parietal pericardium consists of a tough fibrous layer of dense connective tissue with a thin, smooth, moist serous layer. If you kind of look like right here, what's going on, you kind of see how it folds back on itself. And you got two layers, one that's on the surface of the heart, and then one that's separated from a little space. Of course, the one that's separated by that little space, that's the parietal pericardium. The space itself is the pericardial cavity. So here I tell you, the serous layer turns in at the base of the heart, forming the visceral pericardium on the surface. You see it's this little light blue line right there on the surface. And then between the parietal and visceral pericardium is a space, that's the pericardial cavity. And, it's a potential space, and like any other serous membrane, the reason why you have serous membranes, they produce serous fluid, and it provides a nice slick lubricating surfaces. And so here, associated with the heart, they often refer to it as pericardial fluid. So pericardial fluid, serous fluid, same thing. It lubricates the membranes, allows the heart to beat with almost no friction. And that's basically the function of any serous membranes wherever they occur. And so there's that. Now, that's looking at the cavity, and that's one of the thoracic body cavities to accommodate the heart. Now here, we're looking at the tissue layers of the heart, the wall of the heart. And so if you look at what's making up the wall of the heart, remember there's always three layers, three cloaks, three tunics. And so if you're looking at the structure of the heart in three distinct tissue layers, there's a different context. What are the three layers? Well, the superficial most layer, here they call it the epicardium. Epi means like upon, cardium upon the heart. Well, technically the epicardium is the same thing as the visceral pericardium. So it's the same thing. See, visceral pericardium, that's the epicardium. Look, even they do it right here. Visceral pericardium, epicardium, same thing. That's that serous membrane again, overlying a thin layer of areolar connective tissue. In some areas of the heart, in some individuals, there can even be deposits of adipose connective tissue, some like fatty layers on the surface of the heart. Okay, that's all part of the epicardium. The middle layer, the next layer, is the myocardium. Look at the prefix myo. Anytime, remember myo, like myology is the study of muscle. Well, myocardium is literally cardiac muscle. That's the muscular part. And this forms the bulk of the heart. Most of the thickness you see is myocardium, or just cardiac muscle, really. Of course, this is the functional layer of the heart, in the sense this is the part of the heart that does all the work, contracting and pumping blood, etc. Okay, so that's the second layer. And the third layer, the innermost layer, this lining the inner surface. You see the this light, white line right there, and this little squiggly white line right there. That's the endocardium. Endocardium is basically the endothelium inside the heart. Now remember, endothelium is the inner lining of a blood vessel. Well, the heart itself is really just a modified blood vessel. And so the inner lining is continuous. So I tell you, the endocardium is made up of a layer of endothelium overlying a thin layer of areolar tissue. It forms the smooth inner lining of the chambers and the valves, and it's continuous with the endothelium of blood vessels. For example, like if you're in here, this tissue, it's going to be simple squamous epithelium right here. And then if you went from in this chamber out into one of these blood vessels here, 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 I mean, you couldn't tell the difference. It'd be simple squamous the whole way. It's going to like tiles on a floor, and you're going from one room to the next, and the floor is continuous. The endothelium would look the same. So anyway, that's the three layers: epicardium, myocardium, endocardium. And histologically, they're all distinct. All right, so there's the layers of the heart. I'm trying to advance. I don't know which button to push between buttons. Next, the chambers of the heart. Now, the heart is often referred to as a hollow organ. Of course, it is hollow. You look at it, but it's just not. It's a simple hollow organ. The hollowness is divided into chambers. Okay, and there's 4 distinct chambers. There's 2 atria and 2 ventricles. The right and left atria receive blood flowing to the heart. Each atrium has a small ear-like extension called an auricle that slightly increases in volume. A lot of times students will confuse the terms auricle. See that right there? I ought to underline that. Have I ever done some on-the-spot editing? I do that all the time. I should do that. Underline that. Each atrium. These are like buzzwords there. Okay. Ta-da, there. They're not the same thing. They're kind of associated with the same thing. On this particular slide, you can't see the auricles. The auricles have been removed. In the next slide, I'll point them out. But the hollow space are the atria. This is the right atrium. Let me get my laser. And this is the left atrium. Why do they call them atrium? Well, an atrium, like on a building, like if you have a big fancy house, a nice big front door where you receive your guest, that portion of the house where you receive your guest, the little room beyond the front door, like the foyer or foyer. On a big house, they call it an atrium, okay? That's where your guests are received. So this space right here is the receiving chamber. Blood's coming in here, blood's going up there, over here, blood's coming in here. Yeah, these vessels over here are dumping into there as well. The atrium. And you have 2 separate atria. You have one for the right side of the heart, one for the left side of the heart. Notice that there's differences between the right side of the heart versus the left side of the heart. All of this, all the blue, you see all this blue right here? That's the right side of the heart. And all this red, that's the left side of the heart. Why is there a blue side and a red side? Well, the colors, that's just all symbolic. If you look at a heart, it's not going to look blue and red. And your arteries and your veins don't have blue blood or red blood. That's just all, just symbolic. So why do they choose red and blue? Well, red, the color red, take an art class. You probably talk about the emotional connections with certain colors. You hear that? Like if you had to pick a color that was warm, cozy, and comfortable and life-giving, would you choose red or would you choose blue? Which seems more warmish? Doesn't red seem more warm and life-giving, doesn't it? Opposed to blue? Doesn't blue feel like a colder, lifeless color compared to red? Would you agree? You're just kind of looking at me. I like blue too. Blue's my favorite color. But blue is a colder, cooler color. And it's a less life, has it's lifeless, I guess. So anyway, blue, the color blue represents oxygen poor blood or deoxygenated blood. Okay, so on the right side of the heart, this is all deoxygenated blood, blue blood. Not really blue, it's just metaphorically blue. Okay, the left side, the red side, there's more life, more energy, because there's oxygen, there's oxygen-rich blood. So anywhere, it doesn't matter where the blood vessel is. It doesn't matter if it's an artery or if it's a vein. If it's carrying oxygenated or deoxygenated, you know, the red means it has oxygen-rich blood. If it's blue, it has oxygen poor blood or deoxygenated blood. So you can have arteries carrying oxygenated blood or deoxygenated blood, and veins carrying oxygenated blood or deoxygenated blood. And we'll talk about what makes an artery and a vein a vein. And in short, I'm just getting ahead of myself, but arteries and arteries versus veins is not red and blue like a lot of people would assume. It's direction of blood flow. If it's flowing away from the heart, whether it's blue or red or oxygen rich or oxygen poor, it doesn't matter. But if it's flowing away from the heart, it's an artery. If it's carrying blood to the heart, whether it's red or blue or artery or vein, it doesn't really matter. Or no, it doesn't matter. If it's going to the heart, it's a vein. Okay. So anyway, back to the chambers. So you have four: the two atria. Advance. Go. There you go. Right and left atria receiving. Okay, I told you about all that. Then the two inferior chambers that correspond with each of the atria are the ventricles. The ventricles, that's the really muscular, meaty part of the heart where you see most of the myocardium. Okay, and of course they pump blood, they contract, and it squeezes blood out of the ventricles to in arteries, because carrying blood away from the heart for distribution elsewhere. The right, this is the right ventricle right here. Why does this damn thing keep popping up? Okay, this one, when it contracts, see, it's all blue. It's going to be sending blood out. Where would you want to send deoxygenated blood? Well, send it somewhere where it can become oxygenated. Where's that? Well, the lungs. So from the left ventricle that receives its blood from the right ventricle, which receives its blood from the right atrium, is going to go to the lungs. Okay, so this is up out to the lungs. This is the left side of the heart, all the red oxygen-rich blood. It's going to be contracted, and it's going to send all that bright red life-giving blood out to the entire body. Okay, and if you look, you can actually kind of excuse me, see there's physical structural differences between the right side and left side of the heart. Look at the outer wall right here. This outer wall of the left ventricle versus the outer wall of the right ventricle. What's the difference between here and here? Well, this right ventricle is much thinner. You see that? And then on the left side, it's much thicker. So you have more myocardium on the left side than you do the right. Well, what does that mean? It's stronger, more muscle. You got more muscle, it's stronger. Why is it stronger? Well, the right side doesn't have to be that strong. It doesn't have to put forth that much force. Why? Well, where's this blood going? What occurs right here? Look, thoracic body cavity, heart's in the middle. What's on the sides of the heart? The lungs. So really, it's just sending blood to here and here. So just basically it doesn't leave your chest, just the center of your chest. It's sending blood to your, your lungs and back. But over here, the left ventricle, the big meaty muscular part, a lot more force because it's going to send blood out, not only just to your thoracic body cavity, but to the top of your head, to the bottom of your feet, and then with enough residual pressure to return blood back to your heart again. So yeah, the left ventricle is much thicker, much meatier because it has much more force. Okay, other features of the heart include, these are some landmark structures for you, an atrioventricular sulcus, an anterior and posterior interventricular sulci, and an interventricular septum. That sounds very, very wordy. But if you look at going to examine the words up close, and it's not so bad. Atrioventricular, must be between the atria and the ventricles. There's a remember the word sulcus? We had sulci in the brain, those little grooves that are in the brain. Well, you have sulci on the heart. There's a groove that kind of separates the atria from the ventricles. Well, there's your floppy puppy dog ear thing I was telling you about. The auricles. See, here's an auricle, but cut away, the hollow part underneath it would be the atrium. So that's the difference. Anyway, you can see this is the right auricle, and there's a little piece of the left auricle right there. They're kind of deflated right now, but when they receive blood, they kind of expand a little bit, and then they contract somewhat to push blood into the ventricles. But at any rate, there's a groove underneath, and it's just a landmark position. The little groove between the auricles and the rest of the meaty part of the heart. This would be the right ventricle here. Then there's another groove right here, and then there's the left ventricle. So this is the atrioventricular sulcus with blood vessels running in it. And then down the front of the heart is an anterior interventricular sulcus. And there's one just like it in the back. This is a posterior interventricular sulcus, and there's blood vessels there. These depressions, these sulci are riding on top of an internal wall or a separation that separates the two ventricles. That's the interventricular septum. If you look at this next slide, right here, of course, is a frontal section of the heart. And you can see right here, there's the interventricular septum, the actual partition that separates the right ventricle from the left ventricle. And the superficial expression of that septum would be the anterior and posterior interventricular sulci. Okay, so that's what that is. And we identify those because, like I said, this is landmark, and there's blood vessels in there that we're going to study and so forth. Okay. Number 4, the valves of the heart. Okay. Now remember, there's 4 chambers, 1, 2, 3, 4. What prevents blood from going the wrong direction? Well, you actually have check valves. A check valve is something that's kind of like a gate that you pass through, but it doesn't allow you to go back. Okay, and that's what happens in the heart. You don't want, once blood passes through from one chamber to the next, you don't want it to go back the opposite direction. So you have valves to do that. And so I tell you, the valves prevent backflow of blood in the heart. And you have 2 sets of valves that do this. You have a pulmonary semilunar valve that guards the opening from the right ventricle into the pulmonary trunk. This big blue vessel, remember, that's heading to the lungs. It's going to split into 2, one to the right lung, one to the left lung. But before it splits, it's called a pulmonary trunk. Anytime you hear the word pulmonary, refers to the lungs. The word trunk, T-R-U-N-K, is a large artery. Okay, that's just kind of like a buzzword for you. That might be something else I should underline, I guess. But large arteries are called trunks. Large veins are called sinuses. But the pulmonary trunk is a large artery carrying blood to the lungs. And at the base of it, all right, there's a valve right there. When the ventricles contract, they're going to want to force blood out. and they're closed at this point right here. But you put a little pressure on the back of them, they'll pop back open. But as soon as the ventricles relax, they're going to want to close. And that when it does that, the blood is flowing out. And when it comes back, it can't leak back into the ventricle. So that's your pulmonary semilunar valve. Now, again, this is a blue vessel. And I said it's a trunk. And I said that trunk is an artery. And this is one of your examples of a blue artery. I know most people fall into that trap and assume all red vessels are arteries and all blue vessels are veins, but that's not true. The pulmonary trunk actually splits into a left and right pulmonary artery. And look at the colors of the pulmonary arteries. Pulmonary arteries are red, all right, and we're going to see the pulmonary veins are blue. And pulmonary veins are, did I just say that backwards? I sure did. The pulmonary arteries are blue and the pulmonary veins are red, okay? Anyway, this is your first valve, the pulmonary semilunar valve, that prevents backflow into the right ventricle. Now, on the left side of the heart, there's the same thing, guarding the opening for the aorta. This is the large artery coming out, carrying out all the oxygen-rich blood to the entire body. Well, you want to prevent back, you barely see it back there. That's the aortic semilunar valve. The aortic semilunar valve guards the opening between the left ventricle and the aorta, because remember, this is the ventricle right here. The big meaty part contracts, pops this open, blood rushes out, and as soon as the ventricle relaxes, the blood's going to naturally want to come back this direction, but it can't because that valve's closed. Now, those are your semilunar valves, your pulmonary and aortic semilunar valves. You also have two other valves between the atria and the ventricles. That's these structures here and here. Since they're between the atria and the ventricles, they're called atrioventricular valves, or just simply AV valves. You have a right AV valve and a left AV valve, for the right side of the heart and the left side of the heart. The right AV valve, this one right here, is called the tricuspid valve. See, parentheses, tricuspid, which means it has three cusps. What's a cusp? Well, the cusps are these broad, flappy-like structure right there, which actually closes against the other two cusps to prevent backflow. There are three cusps on the right side, but on the left side, there's only two. The left AV valve, or bicuspid valve, because it only has two cusps, is also called the mitral valve. So on the left side of the heart, there's actually three names for the AV valve. The left atrioventricular valve, bicuspid valve, or mitral valve, it's all the same thing. Why are they called the mitral valve? Well, bicuspid means it has two cusps. Of course, left AV valve because it's on the left side of the heart, but mitral, that's more of a descriptive term because it is of or like a mitre. What's a mitre? Well, yeah, a mitre is is it a mitre or a mitra? Maybe it's a mitre. Like the hat a bishop wears, the cool hat like the Pope wears. It's called a mitre. I go, what? Yeah, remember, I said to you this 100 times in this class that, the early anatomists, they were all Catholic and they were all educated in the church and everything, everything that part of their lives, everything was about the church and is, of course, is very, I guess one-sided. I guess is the way they were thinking. Is everything they saw, they would remind them of the church or the body or something. But anyway, they said that looks like the Pope's hat. So let's call it the mitral valve. And if you look at it, you'll never look at the Pope's hat again. I'm not trying to be disrespectful or sacrilegious or politically incorrect or whatever. I didn't name the damn thing, that they did, but it's one of those old archaic terms that that just won't go away. I mean, most modern cardiologists still refer to the left AV valve as the mitral valve. As a matter of fact, there's a pathological condition called MVP. MVP doesn't stand for most valuable player to a cardiologist. MVP stands for mitral valve prolapse. Okay, mitral valve prolapse. They don't call it BVP or lefty V. No, they don't say that. Mitral valve. What's mitral valve prolapse? Well, prolapse means like to fall out or basically turn inside out, and that's a serious condition when you're looking at the left side of the heart. Remember, what's the left side of the heart doing? That's the meaty side that's contracting with a lot of force to send oxygen-rich blood and nutrients to the entire body, okay? But if this side, that valve becomes compromised, and instead of closing like this, when it opens and closes, that's what makes your lub-dub. It's lub-dub. That's the dub part, okay? Closing, well, if it turns inside out like this, or one of them flips in, blood is gonna leak back into the left atrium. Remember, that's the whole point, is this valve is to prevent backflow into the atrium on both sides. You know, the tricuspid valve is to prevent backflow into the right atrium, and of course the left one of the mitral valves prevent backflow into the left atrium. Well, if this becomes leaky, it's going to compromise your cardiac output. What's your cardiac output? The cardiac output is the known volume and pressure of the blood coming out of the heart. And you have to have optimal pressure and volume of blood coming out of your heart to serve your organs. So if you have diminished cardiac output, you're not going to get enough blood to your brain and your other organs. And so that's a problem. So basically your heart's broken. It's not working efficiently. You know, you're not getting enough blood. And so that has to be repaired. You can detect that with a heart murmur. Yeah, a murmur is just any. You've heard of a heart murmur? That's any sound or abnormal sound that the heart makes. You know, you get your normal lub dub. But if it goes like lub dub hiss, it's what's making that noise. You look at it, and well, you got a leaky valve. You know, could be caused by other things, but this would be an area of concern. Often young people will have a murmur, could be a leaky valve, and sometimes, a lot of times they just grow out of it. You know, their heart's growing and things are happening in their young bodies, and it kind of fixes itself. Sometimes it can be fixed in adults medicinally, or with valve replacement. They actually replace the valve with an artificial valve. It happens more in women than it does in men, for some reason that we just don't know. And then of women, more often in women who have had children versus women who have not had children. Think about that. Your poor mama, oh my gosh. She the things that our mamas go through for us, you know. Leaky valves, leaky bladders. You know, after having kids, you know, your bladder never does work quite right, you know. Gray hair, all kinds of things. So, hey, Mother's Day, remember that. I don't know. Anyway, so what else? Oh, these string, you notice you don't have these string-like things with the semilunar valves. Only the AV valves have these little stringy things. They're called chordae tendidae, which literally means heart cords. Here I tell you, string-like chordae tendineae attach the valve cusps to papillary muscles. This is only associated with the AV valves. These little extensions that stick up right there, those are the little papillary muscles. Now, they used to think that those papillary muscles had some kind of function, like they contract and they pull on these strings and do something, but no, that's not what they do. They just kind of, there's parts of the endocardium that just anchor the chordae tendineae, which gives, it just acts as a substrate for these AV valves. Anyway, they're there, which are, like I said, unique to the AV valves. The semilunar valves don't have anything like that. Okay, what else? I talk about the function of how these valves work. They basically work the same way. The opening and closing of the heart valves is a result of pressure gradients from one side of the valve to the next. So they're kind of open like this, but you put pressure on the backside here and here, causes them to close. You release that pressure and it opens up again. So close, open, close, open. And then the semilunar valves are actually the same way. I don't know if I can do my hands like that. Kind of like this. Can you see? Does that make sense? Anyway. So that's the heart. Structure of the heart, valves, etc. Now we're getting into some circulation. Now there's coronary circulation. Anytime you hear coronary, you think of the heart. Like anytime you hear the word pulmonary, you think of the lungs. Pulmonary is lungs, coronary is the heart. Now what's coronary circulation? Well, a lot of times you forget, or you could, that the heart is an organ, and all organs of your body have a blood supply to it. Your kidneys and your liver and your gonads and whatever, your brain, blood going to it, blood coming away from it, because they're functional organs. They need oxygen and nutrients, and they're going to create waste products that need to be removed and so on and so forth. Well, your heart's no different. And so it actually has a blood supply to it. Doesn't seem really efficient. You think like, it's pumping blood. Why can't it just get oxygen out of the blood it's pumping? It can't do that. It doesn't seem real efficient, but it actually pumps blood from itself to itself and drains blood from itself and to itself. So that arrangement of blood supply to the heart as an organ is coronary circulation, okay? And so here, I tell you about that. The first branches off the aorta, remember the big red one? It technically starts at the aortic semilunar valve, right? As soon as this aortic semilunar valve opens, and it's going to open by the ventricles contracting, right? Opens up, and blood rushes up. The first branches that come off of it are the right and left coronary arteries. Okay, follow what they do. They supply all the blood to the surface of the heart. You look right here, you can barely see it. They don't really label it, I don't think. Well, I guess they kind of, not sure what they're doing here. I think they mixed up this one and this one. This is incorrect. I've just now noticed that. This and this is supposed to be reversed. Anyway, the left coronary artery supplies blood to the left side of the heart and divides into an anterior interventricular and circumflex artery. So really it comes out about this far and it splits into two. It has an anterior division and then a division that bends around and goes to the back. The anterior division that runs right down the front of the heart is traveling in that anterior interventricular sulcus. Okay, get it? The division of the left coronary that's riding in the anterior interventricular sulcus is the anterior interventricular artery. That's why it's called that, anterior interventricular artery, because it's in the anterior interventricular sulcus. The other half of it that stays up here and is bending around, your artists kind of screwed this up. These are supposed to be reversed. When it's bending around to the heart, and you're going to see it's bending around and it's going to head towards the back of the heart. That's the circumflex. Circumflex means to like bend in a circle, right? So those are your two divisions of the left coronary. The right coronary, this one right here, supplies blood to the right side of the heart and divides into a marginal artery, which is a little branch coming down kind of on the right side of the heart. And if you follow it, it comes around, and it goes down the back, riding in the posterior interventricular sulcus as the posterior interventricular artery. So there you go. The posterior interventricular artery is a branch of the right coronary, and the anterior interventricular artery is a branch of the left coronary. Does that make sense? And then, of course, there's other branches, and the branches have branches, and so on and so forth. But for this class, I think that's good. And these are the blood vessels of concern when you're studying an angiogram of the heart. And the angiogram is the blood vessels of the heart. And of course, you would look at that if you're concerned about like a clogged coronary vessel due to a coronary thrombosis or plaque buildup. And these are the ones that you're going to look at, okay? Speaking of which, at number 4, I tell you a myocardial infarction, that's a heart attack, occurs when any of the coronary arteries become occluded and a portion of the heart muscle dies from lack of blood flow. I mean, that's the problem. Once, say, this little red one right here, if it comes stopped up, remember, blood's flowing down this way, blood flowing this way, blood flowing this way, blood, you know, goes from the big ones to the smaller ones, and so on and so forth, till you get the capillaries of the heart. But if you stop it up right here, everything downstream from there is not going to receive blood anymore. And if you have tissue that is deprived of oxygen, that tissue is going to die. And of course, you got part of the heart that's supposed to be contracting and working dies. Well, then what happens? Well, it doesn't work anymore, it dies. Well, if it's small enough, you have like little localized death, it might not create any problems. Sometimes it's so insignificant, you don't even know that you have a heart attack. I call it a silent heart attack. I had a co-worker at the blood bank when I used to work at the blood bank as an undergrad. Chain smoker, boy, she would use one cigarette to light another cigarette. And we you know, kind of doing our part in contributing to the blood drives and so on and so forth. That we would, all of the phlebotomists were regular donators, except this one particular coworker. So how come you never donate when all the rest of us donate? You know, just, I can't. I had 7 heart attacks. Chain smoking. Oh, okay, whatever. I don't think anybody would want her blood anyway. So, but she had several heart attacks, but they were small ones, and she didn't even know. I guess that they would show up, these little localized death on an EKG. And so anyway, but think about this: if you get an occlusion way up here, and the proximal portion or the end of the anterior interventricular or the circumflex, you stopped it up here, then all the tissue downstream from that wouldn't receive blood. That's a massive heart attack. That's when they talk about occlusion here, they call those widowmakers. And that's trouble when that happens. So anyway, there's all blood supply to the heart. Now, of course, we got drain blood. So here I tell you, venous drainage refers to the route by which blood leaves an organ. Blood leaving capillaries collect into small veins, which are called venules, and then merge to form larger veins. The great cardiac vein, see this great cardiac vein, the big blue one in the front, drains anterior aspect of the heart. Now, it's right next to the anterior interventricular artery. You think, why can't you call it the anterior interventricular vein? Make it easier on the anatomy student trying to study and learn all these blood vessels. I didn't name it. I would, that makes sense to me. I would have called it that, but that's not what it's called. You have an anterior interventricular artery and a cardiac vein. They're basically doing the opposite of one another. So you're draining the anterior part of the heart with the great cardiac vein, and then the anterior interventricular is supplying blood in the same place. Okay, well, there's that one. Then there's a middle cardiac vein. The middle cardiac veins in the back. See right there, middle cardiac. Again, it's basically doing the opposite of the posterior interventricular artery. Why don't you call it the posterior interventricular vein? I don't know. But it's called the middle cardiac vein. That's the one that's in the back in the posterior interventricular sulcus. Okay. And then there's a small cardiac vein that drains the right side of the heart. But they don't label it over here. But there's three. 1, 2, 3, they all kind of come together right here in the back. You see this common vessel in the back. That's your coronary sinus. All cardiac veins drain into the coronary sinus. Remember I told you the word trunk means large artery and sinus means large vein. So this is a large vein because all the coronary venous blood ends up in here. And then from here, it taps into and dumps into the right atrium. So so you're looking at the back of the heart here. See the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. That's all the blood from above and below the heart, and then also tapping in right in there. You got there's three main vessels that fill the right atrium. It's the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. They don't label it, and then the coronary sinus. They all dump into there. There you go. In most of the body, in most of the body, arterial blood flow is greater when the ventricles are contracting than when they're relaxed. That makes sense. In the coronary arteries, however, flow is greater when the ventricles relax. What? Well, ventricles contract, right? They contract, they squeeze, and they're forcing blood through those semilunar valves. Okay, so blood is rushed right here, right about this level is where the aortic semilunar valve would be. And of course, right about here is the level where the pulmonary semilunar valve would be. Anyway, when the ventricles contract, these two semilunar valves pop open and blood rushes right past these two coronaries. All right, so the coronaries are not filled when the ventricles are contracting, because it just kind of passes them up. But what happens when the ventricles relax? Remember I told you when they relax, blood wants to come back this way and flow back into the ventricles, but it can't because the semilunar valves are closed now. So the semilunar valves are closed, blood is coming back. Look right next to the semilunar valves. That's where you have your right, left coronaries. So that's how they fill. They actually fill during ventricular relaxation. So blood is coming back, and then it goes into these two arteries here. It's the only blood vessels that do that. All other arteries fill during ventricular contraction, but only the coronary vessels fill during ventricular relaxation. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so that's the heart. Now we can move on to general anatomy of blood vessels. There's different types of blood vessels and different types of circulatory pathways, and I just kind of go over. This is a pretty cool graphic to kind of demonstrate the different types of pathways, etc. Here, circulatory routes. The usual, this is what you normally think about when you think about circulatory routes. The usual route of blood flow around the body is heart to the arteries, arteries to arterioles, see, arterioles to capillaries, and then capillaries to venules, and then venules to veins. and then from the veins back to the heart again. And that's what you see this first A, see this first one right here. Simplest pathway that involves one capillary bed. Heart, arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, veins, back to the heart again. Now, I want to stress the definition of two terms right here. Arterioles and venules. It literally means, arteriole means small artery, and venule literally means small vein. But it's not just any small vein and not just any small artery. Specifically what these are the vessels that are supplying blood to a capillary or draining a capillary. So arterioles supply blood to capillaries, and capillaries are drained by venules. That's what makes an artery an arteriole, and a venule. They have to be connected to a capillary. And remember, capillaries are the smallest of all the blood vessels. They only exist as endothelium. All the other tissue layers out around forming the walls of the blood vessel are gone. So the only thing that's left is simple squamous epithelial cells forming the hollow structure of the capillaries, okay? Well, anyway, this is your basic simple plan. Heart, arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, veins, and back. Heart again. But they don't all do this, okay? And number two, here I define an artery versus a vein, okay? Number two, an artery is any vessel that carries blood away from the heart, period. See that? Period. I wish I could make that period big. Big fat period there. A vein is any vessel that carries blood toward the heart, period. I didn't mention anything about color. I didn't mention anything about oxygen content. It is all about direction of blood flow, okay? So think about this. If you're carrying blood to the heart, it doesn't matter if it's oxygenated or deoxygenated. If it's going to the heart, it's a vein. If it's going away from the heart, it's an artery, okay? And there's going to be more than one question on your next test about this. And students that haven't tuned in and paid attention to what I'm defining here miss it every time. Because like I said, I'm going to ask it 2 or 3 different ways. You know, what's an artery and what's a vein? Okay, so make sure you get that straight. It's direction of blood flow, period. It has nothing to do with anything else. So it can be red, it can be blue, it can be oxygenated, deoxygenated. But if it's headed toward the heart, it's one. It's headed away from the heart, it's the other. Okay, so number 3, usually blood flows through only one capillary bed before returning to the heart, like you see here in A. However, an exception is in a portal system in which blood flows through 2 separate capillary beds on its return to the heart. See this? That's what's going on here. Got a capillary bed, and then, like you would see here, instead of going back to the heart again, this capillary bed collects blood and then delivers it to another capillary bed. Now, anywhere you have a capillary bed, that capillary bed is associated with an organ or organs, all right? And so, like, this is an organ and that's an organ. Or groups of organs, okay? Well, the vessel that's between these organs or groups of organs or capillaries, same thing, are called portal vessels or a portal system. Portal systems can be found between, there's like 3 main ones in your body: the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland, all right? And when you, in physiology, you'll study about the delivery of hormones and talk about this portal system. They also exist in the kidneys. When we study the kidneys, we'll look at that. And then the main one I want to address in this lecture for the cardiovascular system is the big one that occurs between the intestines and the liver. And you can see this. Imagine this is the intestines, and then you got one vessel right here, and then there's your liver, you know.
So why do we do that? Well, these are all portal vessels. Any vessel that connects two separate organs in, two separate capillary beds is a portal vessel. That's what makes a portal vessel a portal vessel. And we'll talk about the portal vessels. Okay. Number 4, anastomoses. An anastomosis, see, anastomoses, anastomoses are places where two or more vessels merge without including a capillary, like you're bypassing a capillary bed for one reason or another. And you have 3 different types that could occur. You can have veins connecting to other veins, like not going to a capillary bed, you got a vein, and okay, you're going over to another vein. Arteries can do that as well. Arteries go on to another artery. Now, this happens, you can see this going on like right here and here. These are arterial anastomoses, and there's a venous anastomoses. And basically what this is acting as bypasses in certain areas of the body, okay? Why do you have a bypass? Like you go into Lake Charles, you got I-10 and you got 210, the 210 loop that goes around. But they both end up at the same place, right? They both I-10 and 210, they both end up going to Texas if you're heading that way, right? And so it's just 2 different pathways for blood to travel. Like if one bridge closes down, you can go the other way. And that's the same thing. If you get damage to one part of the body and blood can't flow that way, well, at least you have an alternative route. So that's what a lot of these anastomoses do. It allows for an alternative route. But you also have arteries that connect to veins, and that's called an arterial venous anastomosis. And an arterial venous anastomosis is purposely avoiding an organ. Sometimes you want to send blood to that organ, and sometimes you don't. And the classic example, at least the one I was thinking about, when we talked about the skin, remember that? We talked about dermal capillaries, and I said you could look at somebody and you could determine just by looking at them that the nature of their skin, if they're hot, if they're cold. And I said if you're real flush, you're hot. The surface of your skin is hot. But then if it's cold out, you're not going to have that bright flush color because blood has been diverted away from your skin. And so that would be a dermal arterial venous anastomosis to direct blood flow away from your skin. So that's just another example. All right. So those are some pathways. Now we're going to talk about structure of the vessel. Now you're looking at the blood vessels as organs. Remember you got the heart, arteries, arterioles, and the capillaries. Kind of shows you the structure of them at different levels. And when you're talking about histological layers, remember there's always 3 tunics. You got 3 tunics that make up the wall. And it's the tunics wherever they occur, and all organs have tunics, I guess, tissue layers. They're all pretty much named the same thing. A tunica externa, which means literally the external cloak or covering, or sometimes some books will call it the tunica adventitia, which is the same thing. But histologically, it's the outermost layer. It's made of a loose connective tissue. It anchors vessels in place and provides a passage for the vasa vasorum to supply blood to the vessel wall. So vasovasorum, look at that. It literally means the vessel of the vessel. It's, what these are like? These are like, remember coronary vessels are supplying blood to the heart. Because remember the heart, it pumps blood, but it can't obtain oxygen from the very blood it's pumping, okay? And so when some larger blood vessels are arranged like that as well, where they actually have to have blood supply to them. And that's what you would see right here. So these little branches here and here, Those are the vessels of the vessels, the vasa vasorum. And they would be all, if they're located, they're all going to be located on the surface or in the tunica externa. Okay, that's where you'd find them. And again, the middle layer, almost always the middle layer is the meaty muscular layer. And it's called the tunica media, which means middle layer. It's the thickest layer, made up mostly of smooth muscle. And of course, muscle, movement, motion, that sort of thing. So this is the layer that's responsible for vasoconstriction and vasodilation. Just collectively, vasomotion. Vasomotion would be either constriction or dilation. Vasoconstriction is decreasing the diameter of the lumen. And vasodilation, it's vasomotion that increases the diameter of the lumen. Okay. And that takes place due to the presence of the tunica media, because that's where your smooth muscle is. And notice these are veins returning blood to the heart. In this example, of course, these are all blue because most veins are carrying deoxygenated blood and most arteries are carrying oxygenated blood. That's not always the case. When we study the pulmonary circuit, we'll see how that's backwards. All right. So, but if you look, the tunica media, or the middle layer, tends to be thickest in arteries. It's always thicker because if you're going to control the blood flow to an area, it's usually in an artery, okay? And so you get, and of course, the arteries are under more pressure, so it takes more force. And so you get the thickness is different, okay? And the third tunic, the innermost lining, is the tunica interna, or sometimes spelled tunica intima, same thing. Just depends on your author. But this is the innermost lining. That's the layer that's made up of endothelium. The endothelium overlying a basement membrane and a sparse layer of fibroconnective tissue. Structurally, it provides a smooth surrounding through which the blood can pass, so it's a nice slick surface of those simple squamous tiles that line the lumen. And that's it. So there's your three layers. And again, if you're moving from artery to arterial and finally to capillaries and then back up again, if you look at what a capillary is, all these superficial tunics have been lost. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller, basically smaller from the outside in, until only thing you have left is the inner lining, which is the endothelium. So that's it. All you have is endothelium. Because remember, what a capillary is to do, that's the exchange vessel. Because you want it to be thin, 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 allows for oxygen to pass through it. Oxygen can't diffuse through these big old thick walls here. So these are not functioning in transport or delivery portions as far as oxygen and nutrients. That only takes place in the capillaries. Okay, so there you go. There's that. So that's pretty much the structure of everything. Now we can move into some of the circuits. Here are the anatomy of the pulmonary circuit. Again, pulmonary involves the lungs. And this is one that you really need to concentrate on and understand, because this is the one that usually gives students trouble when they're struggling between, okay, what's the difference between an artery and a vein again? And why is it blue? Why is it red? And blah, blah, blah. It's right here. But once you grasp the pulmonary circuit, that should be not a problem. So pay attention. So here, the pulmonary circuit begins with the pulmonary trunk, which, remember, this is the big red one coming out of a big blue one coming out of the right atrium. So the pulmonary trunk that branches into a right and left pulmonary arteries, each of which leads to the lungs. So carrying out pulmonary trunk, pulmonary artery. Here's one to the left lung, and one back here to the right lung. See that? So this is where it all starts. It could start anywhere, but this is where we're starting right here. Pulmonary circuit, pulmonary trunk to the lungs. in the lung. The pulmonary arteries branch into lobar arteries. They carry blood to each lobe of the lung. If you notice, and when we study the lungs, gross anatomical structure of the lungs, you'll see that the right lung is divided into 1, 2, 3 lobes. The left lung is divided into 1, 2. You kind of see in the background. See the little line right there that divides the 2 lobes, the lungs into lobes. And so the right and left lung, they're actually divided into like separate little lungs. It's like you have 5 lungs, 3 in the right, 2 on the left. But they're lobes, okay? And so each lobe has its own blood supply. Okay, that's what I'm trying to tell you here. Again, these arteries further subdivide and lead to capillary beds that surround each alveolus. So this inset right here, you have the lobar arteries branching into smaller vessels, and they branch and they branch and they branch and branch. It's smaller, 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 of course, until you end up to capillaries. And that's what you see right here. They're getting smaller, smaller. This inset here, see the blue coming down. It's branches of, be traced back to here, to the pulmonary trunk. This blood in the pulmonary trunk is the same blood that's coming right here. These are the air sacs of the lungs, the alveoli, okay? And so each alveolus is surrounded by pulmonary capillaries or alveolar capillaries. It's the same thing. Alveolar capillary, pulmonary capillary, same thing. So this is where the blood is going, okay? If you look closely, see the blue, 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 and then it segues to red. See the red? So what's going on? Well, remember, pulmonary, you're going to the, why are you going to the lungs? What are your lungs for? Your lungs are to get oxygen, right? So the blood is going to these capillaries to receive oxygen. So the segue from blue to red is symbolic from deoxygenated to being oxygenated. And so once the blood is leaving the pulmonary capillaries or alveolar capillaries, it becomes oxygenated. So here I tell you, after leaving the alveolar capillaries, the pulmonary blood now carrying oxygen flows into venules. So these red vessels heading back this way. Remember, they're headed back towards the heart. If you're going towards the heart, you're going in a vein. But if you're draining a capillary, you are a venule, right? So the venules, and they merge to form veins, and the veins, pulmonary veins, ultimately leading back to the 2 pulmonary veins that lead the lungs and drain into the left atrium. And you kind of see all that going on in the background back here. So remember, the atria are receiving chambers. The right atrium receiving deoxygenated blood from the body. The left atrium receiving oxygenated blood from the lungs. And it all started down here. Does that make sense? So these are veins. They're red, but they're carrying oxygen. They got to go back to the heart. Red veins. These are blue arteries. They're leaving the heart, going to the lungs. Okay? This is the only place it's backwards like that. Okay? But if you understand that, you shouldn't have any trouble on my next test. All right. So, well, that's a good place to stop. I'm going to stop a little early today, about 10 minutes or so, right? We'll get out at 12:20. Yeah, because I'm going to finish way early. I only have a couple of slides left, but there's a lot packed in these slides, and I want to be able to talk about them without rushing too much. So what stays? Tuesday, Thursday. Oh my gosh, yeah. I'll probably finish this. Maybe I'll stretch it out to Tuesday next week, maybe. But then the week after, let me look at this. Oh, I got a chat going on here. What's my chat say? I have MVP. Okay. Maybe she can tell us about that. All right. Let's see. I'm trying to stop. Escape. Go away. Let's see. Here we go. Let me look at this again. So, yeah, here's today. Here's Thursday. We're off Friday. You come back. Yeah. That'd be just perfect. And we'll probably finish all this material Thursday-ish. Maybe I can stretch it out to Tuesday-ish. Maybe have some time for questions or whatever. But yeah, I plan on having your third exam. It's April, right? April 8th? Yeah, next month. April 8th. The Thursday after next, right? Does that sound right? And I can see you. And then nifty, my wife got me these. See, I normally wear contacts, then have to wear cheaters. I don't know, it's like half a dozen one, 6 of the other. But this helps me. These are special for looking at computer screens. You know, it's got like it's tinted for looking at the screen. And of course they're cheaters, so I can see. Anyway, any questions about anything? Go good? Okay, well, I'm going to cut y'all loose and see you Thursday. All right. Bye.